Hi again then guys, and welcome to another circuit build for Gran Turismo Sport, and this time it's for a requested car, a car which a couple of you guys were having a bit of trouble with. It's a slippery vehicle, it's a classic muscle car, so of course that's one of the main features. They are wallowy and softer through corners, and they are prone to wheel spin as well, given that they have skinnier tyres than they would have these days, with a lot more torque and power than they could have done with having, really. Now, as far as upgrades go, I haven't done anything to it, and that, in its own, isn't advisable. Now, I would recommend especially dropping the weight as much as you can, because that makes a huge difference to this car. If you don't want to, though, then the tune can still work. That's the whole point. This is a universal tune for basically working from if you want to then lower the weight, or increase the weight, or lower or increase the power for different classes, or balance of performance, or whatever the case may be. So, traction control I've got turned off, but that will of course depend on driver and driver experience. As far as tyres, again it will depend on you, but I've got it on sport softs, just to get a reasonable idea of what it's like. Of course, if you go to racing tyres, it will immediately be a whole lot better, but a lot of people think that's overkill, so we've left it off just to see more accurately what it can be like. As far as the suspension, you want to drop the ride height as much as you can, lowers that centre of gravity, keep all of that weight nice and low, which helps through corners quite a lot, plus it means that in conjunction with the stiffer springs and dampers, you don't roll around as much. The car sways much less and it's much more focused. As far as the frequency, we've increased that to 1.8, so it's not ridiculously high, but it is higher. The anti-roll I've got on 7. You could try taking that even higher to reduce the sway even more, but I've left it on 7, as you can see. As far as compression on the dampers, I've increased that quite a lot to 64. The rebound, not quite as much, because it's not as relevant to the cornering, going into a corner that is. It's more so going out of one when you reapply the throttle. And then as far as the camber and tow, we've gone neutral, as usual. So if you want to give it a bit of camber, it can certainly help, especially if you're less experienced, or if you just want to. You know, there's nothing wrong with camber, go for it if you want to, that's the point. I personally like to make my cars so that they don't need it, but again, it's down to you. As far as the diff, I've gone for halfway on initial torque, then as low as possible for both acceleration and braking. I know that my diff settings aren't for everyone's tastes, but give it a try. If you don't like it, of course you could try something else. If you try it and like it, then feel free to mess around, go with different settings, and then if you don't like those, you can always come back to this and try it again. And as far as the gearbox, it's a circuit tune, it's a handling tune, not a straight line machine, so it's not really about that. Especially when you increase the power, that will put that all out of whack anyway. But you want the fully customized gearbox with, I've gone for an auto setting of 155 anyway, which immediately drastically increases the top speed, because among other things, you get extra gears to work with. Now I've rounded off the gearing to 1.8, 1.3, 1, 0.8 and 0.7, and then the final drive to 3.5. That's more than enough for its stock form in terms of power and weight. But of course, if you do increase the power drastically, you will need to change those settings because you'll top out. That goes without saying. But that's it for the tune. There's tons of room for variation, of course, dependent on the track you're on, the power level, the weight level, and also just personal preference. So all that remains is to actually take it out on a track, on this occasion Suzuka, to see what it's capable of. So one thing that definitely needs to be said, and this is a fairly obvious thing, but still, I'll mention it for those who perhaps haven't thought of it. This car is never going to dominate the category. It's just not that kind of car. In its time, it was a force to be reckoned with, just like many muscle cars were. But nowadays, it just isn't that level of machine. It's big, it's heavy, and even when you modify it and stiffen it up, you've still got more wallowy cornering manners than something like a modern sports car or coupe will have, even in the same category. So don't be surprised if you try to race this thing and get beaten by cars with less power. It's not that it's slow, it's a lot faster than stock, even though technically it is still stock. It's more so that the car itself just doesn't have that potential, and one of the reasons for that is because the game is more realistic. On Gran Turismo 6, we could make it a whole lot quicker, to the point where it wasn't really that accurate to real life, whereas now, with it being more real, you can still get the tail out, you can still spin up the tyres, and it's more so about keeping the car controlled and smooth. Smooth throttle, smooth cornering, and I'd recommend as well, do not try to steer and brake at the same time. Regardless of if you have ABS on or off, that's something which, to be honest, you should apply to any car, but sometimes it's easy to forget that and try to go into a corner while turning and braking at the same time. If at all possible, you need to brake while you're going straight, then allow the car to coast just a little bit through the corner, and then ease onto the power as you exit. Again, that applies to a lot of cars, but with some, you have to do it that way if you want it to be smooth and controlled and not just to drift all over the place. And a muscle car is a perfect example of that. So if you do decide to use the tune, I hope of course you have a ton of fun with it. It's a lot more controlled and a lot faster than it originally was, and you'd hope that would be the case. And if you want to check out plenty of other tunes on the channel, of course you can click through at the end to see those. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.